antiga arca funerária, portando a inscrição: Tiago, filho de José, irmão de Jesus, pode ser o tão procurado vínculo com o Messias.
If it is authentic, it's certainly the find of the millennium, not just the century. But this worries me considerably.
Pouco depois que o mundo soube a respeito do ossuário de Tiago, este mergulhou em mistério e controvérsia. Porque a parte da inscrição parece escrita por outra mão? Como o dono do ossuário obteve este artefato? E o que fez o ossuário rachar quando transportado ao museu?
Believe it's a modern day fraud, but I couldn't rule out unequivocally that it's not a modern forgery.
Cientistas e estudiosos estão conduzindo testes especializados no ossuário. E teólogos estão discutindo se Jesus sequer teve um irmão, tudo para determinar se essa arca conteve de fato os ossos de Tiago, o irmão de Jesus. Tiago, o irmão de Jesus?
Hello, I'm Father Candice. For the next hour, we will follow an investigation, a fascinating inquiry into the authenticity and impact of what could be one of the most important biblical finds to date, the James Ossuary.
Mais trapezoidal do que retangular, o ossuário ou arca funerária é bem pequeno. 50 centímetros de comprimento na base, estende-se a 55 centímetros na parte de cima. Tem 25 centímetros de largura e 30 de altura. 20 letras em aramaico inscritas em um dos lados da arca formam as palavras: Tiago, filho de José, irmão de Jesus. Desde que o ossuário tornou-se público em outubro de 2002, especialistas têm estudado o que talvez seja um artefato antigo extraordinário.
If this is referring to Jesus, the Christ of the Christians, and we have now brought the Jesus of faith and the Jesus of history closer together, that is a mind-blowing event for a lot of people.
We are detectives as historians, and we have the evidence sitting there, and then we need to generate a hypothesis to explain that evidence. It is an ossuary. It's got real material. It's from the ancient world. The question is, where does it fit?
Arqueólogos encontraram centenas de ossuários e possuem vasto conhecimento sobre o seu propósito e significado. Essas arcas funerárias, geralmente feitas de calcário, eram muito usadas em Jerusalém entre os anos 20 a.C. e 70 d.C.
When a person died, they would be wrapped in a shroud and placed in a tomb that was an above-ground tomb, such as we imagine for Jesus. And then the tomb would be sealed so that as little air as possible would get in. The body, of course, would decompose, and after about a year, the family would come in, gather up the bones, place them in an ossuary, and that ossuary would be then placed in the tomb.
Once the skeleton is taken apart, the ossuary only has to be as long as the longest bone in the body, which I understand is the tibia.
Uma das coisas mais importantes a ser estudada em ossuários é a inscrição. O estudo da escrita antiga, chamado paleografia, é um campo altamente especializado. E André Lemaire, da Sorbonne, em Paris, é um dos maiores especialistas mundiais. No verão de 2002, Lemaire tornou-se o primeiro estudioso a ver o ossuário de Tiago.
How did you come across this ossuary? I mean, you have seen it.
It was very simple, just by chance, I must say. By chance, when I was in Israel for 6 months, working at the Institute for Advanced Studies, somebody just told me I may have something to show to you which could be interesting for you.
misterioso contato de Lemaire em Jerusalém pediu sigilo. Não queria seu nome revelado. Mas o fascínio de um achado potencialmente grande foi forte demais para o paleógrafo ignorar.
He wanted to show me a picture of an inscription which is very difficult to read and which he could not read. So he wanted to know whether...
Okay, if you could read it.
Yes, exactly. So I read with him because it's very clear. James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Jesus. I told him, well, this could be, I was very cautious, this could be the famous James, and if it is James, then it could be Jesus of Nazareth.
The ossuary presumably dates to an era long before people had last names. If they had, the process of authenticating it would be far easier. But since we're left to speculate, Lemaire's next step was to study the names on the ossuary: James, Joseph, and Jesus.
There are three of the most common Jewish names for men in the first century. Yaakov, which is our James, Yosef, which is our Joseph, and Yeshua, which is Jesus, were all extremely common men's names. And so none of those by itself would attract attention. What has attracted attention, of course, is the particular combination here.
There are a number of statistical arguments being presented now with varying degrees of probability assigned to them. One can do this sort of like a slot machine, a one-armed bandit. You know, what are the chances of these three rolling up together in the same series, in one series?
Segundo estudos em inscrições de ossuários do primeiro século, naquela época cerca de 14% de todos os homens judeus chamavam-se José. Cerca de 9% chamavam-se Jesus e 2% chamavam-se Tiago ou Jacó. Cálculos estatísticos indicam que menos de 3 em 2.000 pessoas poderiam chamar-se Tiago, filho de José. Acrescentar um irmão chamado Jesus reduz as possibilidades a cerca de uma pessoa para cada 2.000. Usando uma estimativa populacional de 40.000 homens na Jerusalém do século I, Lemaire pôde limitar as possibilidades.
I calculated maybe for this period, during this period, there were probably about 20 people who could be called James, son of Joseph, and who had a brother called Jesus. But what is very important is that on ossuaries, generally you don't mention the name of the brother.
Why would you mention the brother, since it's usually not? Some say, well, it might be because the brother was somehow prominent. That might be the case. We don't know that it was, because we don't have other examples of that, but that's reasonable to assume.
Depois de completar sua análise dos nomes, Lemaire reencontrou o recluso proprietário da arca.
My conviction was that it was a genuine. That was very clear for me. So I told him now it could be very important. So is it possible to publish? We have to publish it.
Lemaire contatou em seguida um colega de profissão, Herschel Shanks, editor da Biblical Archaeology Review.
Known by its acronym, BAR.
So he called me back and he told me, look, Andre, I know that you're a good paleographer and so on, but you know, it could be so important that it's necessary to have the ossuary checked in a laboratory.
So the ossuary was tested by the Geological Survey of Israel, and the test confirmed that the box was first century and from Jerusalem. And with that information, plus Lemaire's expertise on the inscription, a report was published. And the response to that report was immediate.
Serious questions about the authenticity of the object have arisen since its initial publication in the BAR, several of which I shall mention today. I think there was a bit of a rush to judgment, if I may call it that, and I think it was a little too quick and a little too much at stake here.
Em novembro de 2002, o ossuário foi enviado para Toronto, no Canadá, onde vários arqueólogos e pesquisadores bíblicos estavam reunidos para sua convenção anual.
The timing of the discovery of the ossuary was completely fortuitous for the organizers of the conference, and the quick work that they did in bringing the ossuary to the Royal Ontario Museum so that conference goers could take a look. That was quite fortuitous.
Além de ver o ossuário pela primeira vez, os participantes da convenção também puderam conhecer seu misterioso proprietário. O sigiloso contato de Lemaire, em Jerusalém, era um engenheiro chamado Oded Golan.
For several weeks I've tried to remain anonymous, as most of you have probably heard, but unfortunately I couldn't do it.
Forçado a se expor pelo intenso assédio da mídia e sob o olhar desconfiado dos especialistas em antiguidades de Israel, Golan finalmente contou sua história. Havia comprado o ossuário no mercado negro, mas as origens dele eram nebulosas.
I purchased the ossuary about 25 years ago in East Jerusalem. At that time I was told that it was found in the valley of Silwan, in the Kidron Valley, which is southeast of the old city of Jerusalem.
The reported place of discovery for this ossuary, namely Silwan, is a very typical kind of place. A number of burial tombs have been found there.
The fact that we are missing the context for this find makes all the difference in the world. Archaeology is about accuracy. Archaeology is about authenticating the context of artifacts in time and place three-dimensionally. Had we found it in context, we would have had the associated artifacts. We would have had the full skeletal remains to do DNA on, do carbon-14, chronological dating. All these things could have been resolved. The collector has some of the bone fragments, won't let us look at them. I don't quite understand that. They might be relevant for carbon-14. They certainly would be relevant for DNA.
The fact that we don't know the archaeological context of the ossuary makes authenticating it that much more challenging. But if it's ever proven that the inscription on the ossuary refers to the Jesus of Nazareth, it would be an amazing find. When we return, we're going to learn more about the relationship of James and Jesus.
Nesta segunda, eles foram símbolo da luta entre o Islã e o cristianismo. Saladino e Ricardo, dois guerreiros separados pela religião. Uma guerra santa que matou milhares de pessoas em nome de Deus. Nesta segunda, às 21 horas. Entre batalhas e crenças, Santos Guerreiros, somente por The History Channel.
The James ossuary, with its inscription potentially referring to Jesus Christ, has prompted many questions. And one of the most fundamental is actually one that's been debated for centuries, whether Jesus even had siblings. But what do we know about this James, the so-called brother of Jesus?
James is an enigmatic character in that the real historical information we have is very little. There's a reference to him along with some other people about his being the brothers of Jesus.
Não é ele o carpinteiro, o filho de Maria, irmão de Tiago, de José, de Judas e Simão? E suas irmãs não vivem aqui entre nós?
And so it's not a surprise that there was a brother named James.
We don't know very much about him as a personality. But it raises those questions about Jesus living in a family context and what would the relationships have been. And I can imagine that for a sibling to have to acknowledge that maybe their brother was the Son of God would be a bit much in most families. Was it that way there? And I think the inscription, if it is authentic and does refer to James, the brother of Jesus, raises all of that.
Para ter uma ideia do relacionamento deles, especialistas voltam-se para os limitados escritos sobre Tiago na Bíblia e encontram indícios de tensão.
Pois nem seus irmãos acreditavam nele.
The family of Jesus seems not to have been supportive in general of Jesus during his lifetime.
E não queriam acreditar nele. Mas Jesus lhe disse: um profeta só é desprezado em sua terra e na sua própria casa.
That may have been one of the reasons why Jesus said, a prophet gets no respect at home, because Jesus didn't get any respect at home.
A Bíblia também fala da recusa de Jesus em interromper seus ensinamentos para falar com sua família.
Então alguém lhe disse: tua mãe e teus irmãos estão lá fora querendo falar contigo. Jesus, porém, perguntou a quem lhe deu o recado: quem é minha mãe e quem são meus irmãos?
He turns aside and doesn't want to see them and doesn't want to relate to them. So from that, some people have suggested that perhaps during the course of Jesus' ministry, there was some tension between him and his blood family.
Mas após a crucifixão e a ressurreição de Jesus, Tiago parece ter se tornado cristão.
Cristo morreu por nossos pecados, segundo as Escrituras, foi sepultado e ressuscitou ao terceiro dia, segundo as Escrituras. Depois, apareceu a Tiago e a todos os apóstolos.
Nos anos que se seguiram à ressurreição, Tiago tornou-se o líder da igreja em Jerusalém.
We're not really sure exactly how. It may well be that James considered himself simply a successor and someone who continued on the teachings and message of Jesus.
There was something like a Jesus dynasty that developed, that there was some effort to keep the leadership, at least of the Church of Jerusalem, in the family of Jesus. Because after all, the brother of Jesus, James the Just, was the first known ruler of that church.
Em Gálatas, Paulo escreveu:
reconhecendo a graça que me foi dada, Tiago, Cefas e João, que são considerados as colunas, deram as mãos a mim e a Barnabé em sinal de pleno acordo. Nós iríamos aos gentios e eles aos circuncidados.
Notice the order: James, Cephas and John. And I think the order indicates precedence in terms of that leadership.
Mas havia uma divisão a respeito do papel dos gentios na nova religião cristã.
Well, I think it's very clear that there were indeed, as Galatians indicates, two streams of Christianity. One that took in Gentiles free from Jewish demands, free from circumcision, free from the purity and food laws. And there was a Jewish form of Christianity represented by James.
Tiago teve um papel-chave nessa disputa. Permitiu que gentios praticassem o cristianismo sem se converterem ao judaísmo pela circuncisão. Foi um acordo significativo que permitiu o crescimento da igreja.
There is that event which we call the Jerusalem Assembly or the Council of Jerusalem. The figure who comes out there as the leader of the Jerusalem church is clearly James.
Depois que terminaram de falar, Tiago replicou: irmãos, escutai-me. Minha decisão é que não perturbemos os gentios que se voltam para Deus.
And James there doesn't seek other people to give their approval to his views. He says, I judge, and he gives his opinion. And the opinion is an authoritative one to which the Jerusalem church assents.
Mas ainda existe discussão sobre Tiago ter sido realmente irmão de Jesus. Protestantes o veem como um irmão de sangue. A Igreja Ortodoxa acha que ele foi um meio-irmão. E católicos o veem como um primo. Há conflito até sobre a Epístola de Tiago.